Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here early. I know that this topic is probably going to be one of the heaviest that you will hear about today in the session lineup, but I think we can all agree, or you wouldn't be here, this is also one of the most important topics that we can be talking about. So one of the things I'll go ahead and say, I'm sorry if I sound out of breath. I'm not nervous. I have a little co-pilot here he's sitting on half my lungs, so I'm getting a little bit out of breath these days. I realize that there's probably no one else that does any kind of legal practice or law-related stuff in the field, so I'm going to keep my part of this presentation very high level because really what we're trying to do is provide a breadth of training for people who are interested in learning more about this topic in the transportation industry. So it'll have a little bit of law and legalese in it, but we'll make it digestible and I'll keep it brief. We're going to talk about what human trafficking is according to the law, and then what we should know about it as transportation industry practitioners, because our knowledge is power that we can pass on in the event that we interact with someone who's experiencing some of this illicit activity. Okay, so just a quick breakdown of how the law categorizes different types of trafficking activity. There are 3 different kinds. I'm not going to read these definitions to you. But typically the law divides different kinds of trafficking activity into sex trafficking, labor trafficking. Both of the first 2 have to do, these definitions apply when a victim is an adult. Okay, so one of the things that you'll notice that's common between these definitions, you see the presence of force, fraud, or coercion. Interestingly or notably, if anybody is a minor and is experiencing trafficking activity on themselves, you don't need that element. Minors cannot consent to any of this behavior, okay? So if you're a minor, you don't have to be coerced. It's enough that the activity is occurring. The third type of trafficking offense that the law treats separately is something called a CSEC offense, which is the commercial sexual exploitation of children. This is something that you may not see that term in the law itself, but it's a specific kind of statute that deals with exactly this issue, and this is mostly regulated at the state level. So, as you all know, trafficking has become an increasingly important issue for the transportation industry, and that really started a couple of decades ago when the US DOT took some major steps towards making this one of its priorities through initiatives like the Transportation Leaders Against Human Trafficking board that they formed, and then also, many of you may have heard by now, there was an award given for the Combating Human Trafficking and Transportation Impact Award. The first one of those went out in 2020 to a group called United Against Slavery. Their main project was that they administered a survey and they talked to victims of trafficking who had had interactions with the transportation industry, and then they also spoke to transportation professionals about a couple of issues. I'm not going to go through all that data. I think almost all of us here were involved in that project at some point or have come across that data. But there's a couple of points I want to highlight really quickly because it informs why we're talking about specific parts of trafficking activity in transportation. One of them was a question that asked survivors, people who had been in a trafficking situation and then come out of it, their interaction patterns with different industries across the transportation modes. So you can see here, these are pretty high numbers with aviation leading, but all of these different industries, someone reported that, yes, I interacted with a transportation employee or a transportation professional in this sector, and that person played a role in either getting me information or assisting me in getting out of a trafficking situation. The next piece of data from that study that I want to point out was the level of interest that was indicated from transportation practitioners about learning more about this issue. And so you can see across here, these were the different topics or questions that were sort of offered to them so that they could indicate, are you interested in learning more about trafficking in this context? And then you can see across the different perspectives, overwhelmingly yes. I mean, there's hardly a number on there that's under 50%. The transportation industry practitioners have indicated that they care about this issue and they want to be informed enough about it to be able to deal with it if they are in a situation where you need to act. Because that's one of the things about a trafficking encounter or an encounter with someone who's experiencing that. I promise you, you won't plan for it. You won't plan for it that day. You won't wake up that day and think, today's the day. I know I'm going to meet someone who I need to be able to interact with and pass on vital information. It'll just happen. And the only way you can be prepared for that is if you plan now for any day in the future when you might have that opportunity, okay? So Really quickly, like I said, we're going to talk about some legal stuff here, but we're not going to get into the specifics of what these laws mean. The point of this slide and this graphic is to show the breadth of available causes of action that exist in our legal system that someone could pursue a remedy against a trafficker for, okay? So on the left here, you have, on your right, you have in orange, these are criminal offenses. You see big federal statutes that you may or may not have heard of, including RICO statute, FLSA. All of these address certain aspects of trafficking behavior that someone can suffer criminal penalties for. Same thing on the state. There's a long list of state criminal violations that can apply to trafficking behavior. Over here on your left, these are civil causes of action. What that means is this isn't a crime. This isn't something that you go to jail for. It's not a criminal offense that the state comes and gets you for. But this is something that an individual who has suffered because of trafficking activity, they can go in their own name and sue the trafficker under any of these causes of action here, okay? And what's really cool is you'll notice that the federal statutes are the same. These big, giant federal statutes that provide trafficking protections in a criminal context also allow the individual to sue in their own standing against their trafficker and the person who exploited them, which is really cool because that's where you get remuneration. Remuneration means money you're owed, particularly if you are in a forced labor situation for unpaid wages. Okay, not going to read through all of these to you, but I want to point out states are doing a pretty good job, and actually most of these numbers, I did the research on this before this past legislative session went through, so a lot of these numbers have gone up. But in addition to criminal offenses and the specific trafficking offenses, which now all states now criminalize trafficking activity, which is really cool. There are other kinds of liability laws that address trafficking behavior. So the business entity liability and facilitator culpability. If your state has a law like that, what that means is if a business is knowingly profiting off of trafficking behavior, they can be held liable for that in a criminal context sometimes. A lot of times this applies to ride-sharing services, any kind of taxi or Uber when there's repeated activity and they're knowingly profiting off of suspicious activity. They have to know it's not something that you can really be caught unawares on. But same thing with like hotels. If a hotel has enough information that under the law they are considered to know that they are making a profit off of trafficking activity, they can fall under one of these categories. The trainings that we're seeing for both law enforcement and then also hospitality personnel, that's another big one that comes up under the personnel training. Not hospital staff, sometimes hospital staff, but more importantly, hotel staff, and then certain types of ride-sharing services are requiring their employees to have either one-time or hopefully repeated and updated trainings every couple of years because crime changes, and so we have to be aware of new types of activity that constitute criminal behavior. Okay, so just to continue on with that for a second, the maps here indicate two types of laws that allow an individual to sue their exploiter or their trafficker under something that wouldn't necessarily in their minds be related to that cause of action, right? So these aren't trafficking offenses that I'm showing. The purple one is whether or not the state has a minimum wage law that applies to private employers. So this could be just you hiring a nanny, someone to help you out with your gardening, with your farming, whatever. You are required to pay them a minimum wage if you live in one of the states, depending on how it breaks down, okay? And if someone's not being paid the state minimum wage, they can sue to get that money back. Same thing here. This has to do with whether or not a state regulates undocumented workers, but essentially undocumented workers can be provided protections even though they may not fall under one of the federal statutes that do apply to legal immigrants here or citizens here. In the top left corner, I always want to point out that sometimes what is illegal, you think about a crime, sometimes we get these graphic images or we think about egregious behavior, but the law actually provides a lot of protection that falls short of those extreme examples. And I think it's important that people know that because you all may be in a position one day where somebody starts describing a situation and you think, that sounds really funny. That's not how that's supposed to work. And that's the goal, is that something triggers in your mind that you can say something and say, yeah, no one's supposed to take your passport or your visa or your driver's license and not give you access to that unless you continue to work for them. That's not how that's supposed to work. In fact, it's a crime. The same thing with if someone is required to relocate for a job and then the employer says, we're going to garnish your wages until you pay us back for what it costs to move you. Not allowed to do that. Same thing with certain restricted movements, access to medical care, can't call home, can't visit home, can't use public transportation, constantly being threatened to be deported, even if they could legally be deported. That's not legal. And if somebody ever were to communicate to you that they're experiencing that, the goal is for you to be able to say, I don't think that's the way that that's supposed to be. I think you need to talk to somebody, okay? So that's really the heart of training about any kind of, like I said, I know most of you aren't legal practitioners. I know you're not gonna go out there and sue anybody, and I don't want you to go out and give legal advice. What I do want you to do is be prepared to pass on knowledge that can really be the moment, the key moment in someone else's life that they are prompted to take action on behalf of themselves or to reach out to somebody else who can help them take that next step. Because transportation and professionals and practitioners in the industry are specifically positioned to come into contact with people moving through the system. You all will have conversations with people, or your employees will have conversations with people that you're not intending to have, and all of a sudden they'll just start describing where they're going, and they're going to a new job, but it sounds kind of weird, and they were told when they get there they can't leave for 9 months, and the pay situation sounds strange. That's your opportunity to say, you know, I don't know if that's exactly the way that that's supposed to work in this country, and we have laws to protect you, and you should know about them, right? Because you can't enforce a right if you don't know you have it. Nobody can do that. You can't take action on behalf of yourself if you don't know that the law is there. So the goal for the transportation industry, as well as the challenge, establishment of oversight agencies, we're getting better about doing that. But that takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of interested good people like you to show up and to care about the issue. Mandating training and then requiring it to be done repeatedly or on an updated basis is important. There's not an issue in the world you could take a training on and then 10 years later could call yourself up to date on it. I mean, there's nothing that would apply to, and the same is true of human trafficking. People have to be updating the information that they're receiving on how to deal with these issues. And of course, funding is always an issue. So we have to get serious about, you know, fighting. We're not going to fight a $90+ billion industry with volunteer hours. That's not going to happen. So we need to get serious about how we commit our resources to it as well. I really apologize that I cannot hang out here for the question and answer session. I neglected to check my class schedule, and I have to teach across campus at 9 a.m. So I'm going to have to head out after this. But I'm going to put my contact information up here. I would absolutely love for any of you, if you have questions, if there's anybody that works at your agency, whether they're here or not, and you think they're interested in this issue, it's a pretty small sector of people. We know each other, we see each other again at conferences like this, so please reach out to me. Please send anybody who has similar interests my way. I would love to be a resource. I would love to partner with them. And thank you very much for your time.
Okay, can you guys hear me? I know, I'm loud. I used to teach high school, so I'm not going to use the mic if I don't have to. Let's put that aside. My name is Kylla Lanier. I'm Deputy Director of TAT, and formerly known as Truckers Against Trafficking. And I am going to talk to you a little bit about that NOS, the National Outreach Survey on Transportation that Trayce just led up to, but wanted to, for any of you that are not aware of what TAT does, our mission is to educate, equip, empower, and mobilize members of key industries and agencies to recognize and report human trafficking. And we started with over-the-road truck driving, but we have expanded to quite a few other sectors, so I'll just let you see that right there. We work with over-the-road, shipping and logistics, dealerships, the bus industry, school transportation, and then on the public sector side, we do work with law enforcement and government agencies. So what I wanted to talk to you about today versus going into like a normal human trafficking 101 was some of those results from the NOS. Trayce just talked about the desire for training from all of the different sectors that were surveyed, how victims intersected with the transportation industry. But I wanted to talk about something else. When I read the 593 pages of the NOS when it first came out at the start of this year, what I was really struck by, what kept coming up over and over was these things, and this was across sectors, and you saw those sectors, transit, maritime, aviation, road transportation, whatever, they all reported that they had concerns about misidentifying human trafficking, right? And of the ones that said they were scared about being wrong, essentially, they said that that would stop them from actually reporting the crime. And I've got law enforcement in the room. Don't we want people to report it whether they're wrong or not, right? Because then you guys can sort it out on the flip side. But they said that that would stop them from actually even reporting the crime. And they were mostly worried about embarrassing the customer or the passenger. They were worried about maybe being sued, and or that law enforcement and their bosses might be upset with them and not listen to them in the future, sort of like boy cries wolf, right? And so these were the concerns. And as I was reading this, whether it was bus or energy or aviation, I just kept thinking, my gosh, we need two critical things. And that's why Jodi's here, that's why I'm here. Training and internal reporting protocols, right? Like, you need to know what your boss wants you to do. You need to know what your company's policy is about these types of things. And so the need for resources was really huge. Of the 2,800 transportation workers who participated in the NOST, they said only 10% had resources. Now, we know that we've obviously trained a huge chunk of society. These were not obviously, some of them were not in this 2,800 people. But what it said to me was, my gosh, we've got to get out there more. We've got to get this message out there. We've got to get the training out there. We've got to get the resources out there. The 90% said they didn't have a card, but it would be helpful to have. And that sort of banks with the different stats that Trayce shared, that they want training, that they desire to have that training. So when I look, I want to talk about some of the sectors within transportation that we do offer resources for. And I don't think, not everybody thinks about these things, but like, think about school bus drivers. In the United States, we have a ton of familial trafficking victims. These are kids that are being trafficked by members of their family, parents, grandparents, uncles and aunts, siblings, etc., who are saying, this kid, if I put them out in labor trafficking or sex trafficking, they can pay my rent, right? Or they can pay for my drugs, or they can pay for food, or, you know, this is what happened to me, this is normal, so I'm going to do it to my kid as well, and sort of that generational familial trafficking. Well, a lot of times these kids go to school. Why? Because the state's going to get involved if they're not in school. And so we know that half of American school children ride the bus. Yeah. Traffickers recruit out of school. How many of you guys have seen our original over-the-road truck driving training video? Yeah. Sherry, the girl that was talking, the survivor that was talking in that video, I would like you guys to know, and we didn't put this in the training video, it was a kid from her high school that the trafficker had hired to basically collect a dossier on kids in the school who nobody would miss if they went missing. Kids that had problems that got suspended a lot, kids that ran away, kids that had for the wrong side of the tracks, right? And so he got to know Sherry and her cousin and had supplied the trafficker with that information. So there was no mistake when he pulled up alongside of them when they were walking to Wendy's. He knew who they were. That's why they got in the car with them. He knew their families' names. He knew where they lived. So they thought he was somebody that was close to their parent. And that's why they got in that car with them and got trafficked. So we know that the traffickers recruit victims out of schools. They may be attending school during the day and they're trafficked in the evenings, on the weekends, and on holidays, right? Or summer breaks. And school bus drivers tend to drive the same routes year after year after year, correct? And so you know, they know these kids, they know the families, they tend to be from the communities themselves. And so they're going to be able to notice those changes that take place. We interviewed a lot of school transportation professionals from around the U.S., and they gave us back this information. 1 in 3 had suspected that a student that was on their bus was being groomed for trafficking or abused. 1 in 4 have reported incidences of suspected child abuse, grooming, or trafficking, and 60% have observed at least one sign of red flag indicators of human trafficking from the kids on their bus. So do you think it would be wise to train school transportation professionals on human trafficking? Yeah. They then have those protocols already in place, you know, they're mandatory reporters, right? They would have those, they would turn it into the principal or to their supervisor, who it would go up the chain, get DPS involved, get law enforcement involved, and really maybe step in and help these kids. And then I just want to share a couple of short scenarios here. I'm not going to get into the full cases, but a bus driver, this is for motor coach and transit. Bus driver noticed 2 teenage girls in a restricted area of a New York bus terminal. They were dirty, they were disheveled, they were begging for a free trip from the driver, even offering sex acts in exchange for the ticket. And then another one happening in Oregon on the other side of the country. An Oregon transit agency got calls from law enforcement and a concerned parent about 2 teen girls that might be there trying to get on their bus. And in all of these cases, in both of these cases, law enforcement did get involved. You had trained transit authorities, trained motor coach authorities that called in law enforcement, that collaborated with law enforcement in this case, and all of the teens were recovered. The 2 teens that were dirty and disheveled in New York, they were removed from an exploitative situation at home. They were being abused, they were being exploited, and they were just trying to get away. And these 2 girls had met somebody online that was going to provide them a new life somewhere else, and they were going out to meet him, right? So we got it prevented there. So what can operators notice in these cases? When we think about bus terminal workers, bus drivers, just people that are there, they can notice signs of recruitment. One of the survivors that I trained law enforcement with for a good 4 years, her trafficker, after he had picked them up on the strip every morning, she said the first stop before they would go home was the Greyhound bus station. And he would go in and he would look for people that were down on their luck, sleeping on, on the bus benches, sort of in the terminal, people that looked like they were lost or sort of, maybe they were run away, they just didn't belong. And he would go up and start conversations with them. And he would promise them, help or a bed to sleep in or a meal, right? And she's like, and half the time they came back to the car with him. And he would traffic them for a short time, maybe some longer, but he was recruiting straight out of the bus terminal. So they might see that. Is there always somebody going in but never getting on a bus, right? They never actually buy a ticket, but they're always sort of lurking around. They're talking to people. Are there job flyers that are incomplete or too good to be true, right? Make $5,000 from just 10 hours of work a week, right? Something like that. Operators could also notice signs of control, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but I mean, you see that. They don't have a ticket, they need a ticket, but they don't have money. They're not in possession of their own ticket, their own ID. We talked about that, Trayce did. Maybe they've taken their driver's license, their passport, etc. They're looking to somebody else to talk to them or talk for them. They can also notice signs of force or fear. So it could be those bruises. It could be, that they don't look nourished, that they are dirty and disheveled, that they are agitated or scared, or they're looking down and they're not talking for themselves. They're upset. They're over in a corner. Somebody else is sort of jerking them along. And, it could look like that. It also could look like, somebody's just got their hand on their shoulder, right? Just got their hand on their shoulder. Doesn't necessarily get a second look, but if you try to talk to them and that hand's just sort of there and then they're looking up at the other person, that's the control factor, right? So it doesn't have to look like abuse per se. It's just, I'm right here. Do you see me? I'm right here. I'm watching you. Every survivor I've worked with has said, I always felt that they were there, even when they weren't physically there. I always felt my trafficker was watching. I always thought they could see me wherever. It is that control and that fear that they put in them from the get. Operators can also notice signs of commercial sex or labor exploitation, right? So it's the offers to exchange sex for a ride or a meal or anything of value, right? If they're talking about having to make a quota or that their daddy's going to be mad at them or something like that. It could be somebody working in the bus terminal or on the bus lines that never seems to get a break, right? So it could be the exploitation is a labor situation happening within that legitimate business that's taking place. Are you noticing these things? Can you report that? So how do we combat all of these things? We know that they're in the right places. They're seeing stuff. What can we do for them? Whether it's a school transportation official or it's a motor coach or transit. We offer separate individualized trainings for them. And what I want to tell you is this. I know that there's a lot of great trainings out there. There's a lot of good general trainings out there. But what we have found with just human nature is people would say, even when we first started TAT and I would talk to people, Taken was sort of the big movie that was out there at that time. I would have truck drivers say to me, well, when I see a girl being auctioned off, I will absolutely call. And they're being sincere. They weren't being funny, right? When I see somebody in chains, I will absolutely call. When I see this, I will absolutely call, right? Because they're not seeing themselves in it. It's this other. It's over here. So the importance of training and the importance of training for individualized sectors where they are seeing the imagery of the road, how they would see it. They're seeing, we're talking to them in their language. We're saying, you might see it here at the truck stop in this way. You might hear CB chatter for this. You might see these types of indicators over here. That's gonna look different than for transit. That's gonna look different than for school personnel, right? And so you want them to see themselves in the training. And so we have these very specific trainings, whether it is for transit and motor coach, school transportation, it's a whole other training. And then we have it for local drivers. And that's gonna be your Amazon delivery, your FedEx delivery. It can also be rideshare. It could also be food delivery to your house, DoorDash, Uber Eats, things like that. It can also be microtransit. So we have trainings for them. We have wallet cards for them. It's all right there. In addition to that, we want to be speaking to the victims themselves. And so we have victim-centered posters that are available. And you think about, you can put these in bathrooms at truck stops. You can also, on the transit motor coach side, have these up in your bus terminals. Think about how many runaways use public transportation or a motor coach ticket to get out of the city, right? What if they see these posters that are directed at them? We worked with survivors to create these posters, right? Both the imagery and the language on them. You could also have them up in your ticket purchasing counter. Any of these places where they're going to frequent, we want them to see that there is help, that if they're hearing these types of things, they can access services. And then we also know that a lot of our school districts have this intersect with public transit across the country and in big urban cities specifically, and in some rural areas. What they are finding is they cannot keep school bus drivers. They cannot keep them in the school district. So they are having to partner with public transit, whether it's shuttles in rural areas or the public transit system to move kids to get them to school. That's under FAPE, federal, it's the appropriate public education. Like, you have to provide access. You have to get them there. So you've got all of these kids now riding public transit to and from school. You also have young people using public transit to get to and from jobs. You also have them using it to get to and from wherever if they don't have a car. This is going to coincide. We know that traffickers are recruiting out of these locations. We know that traffickers are looking at vulnerabilities, and youth is a vulnerability. And so we started our Youth on Transportation campaign. Obviously, we want to use our formal training for the bus drivers, for the terminal workers, but let's talk to the youth themselves. And that's the genius behind our Youth on Transportation. I can't take any credit for it. That was Lexi Higgins. But basically, these are posters. These QR codes go back to these 1-minute little videos where it's youth talking to youth about human trafficking, how they can get involved. We have posters, postcards, stickers, social media assets that can go out there. And so you're both educating the vulnerable at-risk population at the same time equipping the bus drivers and bus terminal workers themselves to identify and report on their behalf. These are all the different anti-trafficking resources we have for the bus section. As you see there, we've got the stickers, we've got the posters, we have for instructors, additional toolkits that give them more information if they want to go beyond the video training itself, and then the wallet cards. And now we circle back to trucking, right? So obviously we started with OTR. That's where we still are. We will always be. The reason why we have the other sectors that we work with is because of the success of the American trucking industry, right? They took this on as their own industry. They've made those calls to the hotline and to 911, and we have had countless victims recovered as a result of those calls from truck drivers and truck stop employees. And so just talking very briefly, again, what we realized as we got into it is that there's different sectors within the trucking industry, right? It's not just all over the road. And we know that local drivers, movers and in-home delivery, right? They might see some of those residential brothels that are running out of people's homes, also familial trafficking victims that are being trafficked from their homes. We had a survivor that worked for us for years. She was trafficked by her mom from ages 6 to 18. Obviously, when she was 6, 7, 8, that's first, second, and third grade, you can't put them out on the street without it causing alarm, right? She was selling her out of her own bedroom. Men were coming to that house. And she said people came in, delivery people, for a new TV, a new piece of furniture, and they saw the condoms in the wastebasket. They saw all of that different stuff, but they were like, I don't really know. And so they walked away and they didn't do it. And she's like, I wish somebody had just paid attention and noticed the signs. I could have been helped sooner, right? I could have been helped sooner. And so we have training videos very specifically for over the road, for those local drivers, for movers and in-home delivery. And then this is our latest training. We've had companies talk to us for years and say, you know, we've been training our drivers, we train them every year. But what about everybody else within our company? Our HR, our executives, our custodial staff, our sales people, our safety, right? What about them? And so we've created our You've Seen Us Before video that came out this year. It's a short 21-minute film, but it has scenarios of both labor and sex trafficking, how all of us can see it in our normal lives. And so I would encourage you to get that training as well. Ways to implement training in person through our videos, the education portal on our site. It gives you a certificate at the end of each of the courses that you take. Or if you have an internal learning management system, we can give you form files, MP4 files, whatever you need. However you deploy training, we will make sure to accommodate that. And then for the trucking industry, obviously beyond the documentary style training videos, we've got wallet cards and stickers and posters and brochures, and all of TAT's training, all of it is free. Okay, all of it has always been free. That's been a core principle of TAT, and it continues to be free and accessible to anyone who wants it. And then we also have an app that you can download for free on iPhone or Android phones. It is tailored to your experience, so you can put in member of general public, right? You can say over-the-road truck driver or school transportation personnel or energy pipeline worker, and it is going to tailor the labor and sex trafficking indicators for your industry. And it has access to the trainings on the app, et cetera, et cetera. So like you can just go find it under Truckers Against Trafficking or TAT, and you'll be able to have all of that information and everything we offer right there. In addition, we have vetted service providers in every single state and province of Canada. And so you can go to a service provider list and click on it if you do encounter a victim or you yourself have somebody that you know that maybe needs services. You can click on your state and find different service providers right there in the state of Alabama, in the province of Nova Scotia, wherever you are, and you'll be able to get that list of service providers and connect. And my last point that I want to make is for law enforcement. Going back to the NOST, that survey, they also interviewed law enforcement personnel. And what they found of the 300 LEOs that they interviewed, 69% of them said that they believe more human trafficking cases are not investigated by local law enforcement because of lack of training. Now, guys, I'm going to tell you that I have trained law enforcement around this country for the last 8 years. And in every single state I go to, I have had people come up and tell me on breaks or at the end, I've missed it. I'm thinking of 2 cases, or in this guy, I'm thinking of 3 different cases. I'm thinking of this case. I missed it. I missed it. I didn't know. I've also had officers come up in every state and say, this is my X number of years that I've been on the job. Why is this the first time I'm hearing about human trafficking? That is not the individual officers, that's just, it's a priority thing, right? And the access to training. And so as a result, we do in-person trainings, But we also created online module trainings for any law enforcement officer that they can take, and they are, again, free. You can take all 5 modules, which would be 6 hours worth of training, or you could just take 1, or you could take 2 or 3. You can sort of tailor it. We did get Analyst certification. It's an international post board, but we have gone through the process in several states of the state post board training certification process as well. And with that, you get an e-toolkit that has a ton of great extra resources for law enforcement. We know that raising all of this awareness and getting all of this information out there is one thing, but we need action behind it. And law enforcement also need the training. It's very specific to them. And I will say in our trainings, we have 3 survivor leaders, we have 2 victim advocates, we have 3 law enforcement officers, and 2 TAT trainers. So they are robust. And they give you a lot of great information. This is my contact information. I'm going to pass it now to Jodi because obviously the training is important, but I would say equally as important is an internal reporting protocol and knowing what your company is doing about it. I got business cards too. Okay, I think everybody's almost right now.
Okay, well, I'm loud, I don't want to scream, so let's turn this on.
Push it once and
It's flashing out.
just push it once.
Okay, you hear me now? Fantastic. Okay, so as I said, I'm Jodi Godfrey, and I'm a Senior Research Associate at Cutter, the Center for Urban Transportation Research at the University of South Florida. So I am a civil engineer by trade. Graphs and policies and things like that are what excite me and get me going, right? So when I had an opportunity to work with TAT to develop a policy, I jumped on it right away. But I don't want to get too far. I want to talk first about, kind of cover a little bit of what Kylla's already covered, but why in the heck you should listen to me in the first place, right? I get that I'm a transit professional, so I'm typically training transit operators. But I think that transit and CMV environments certainly have a lot in common. So I think that some of the things that I've developed and helped in the transit industry could easily be transferred to any other industry that TAT is training. So first I talk about the vulnerabilities. So, Kylla talked about how traffickers prey on people that are vulnerable, right? So the youth, people that have financial instability, people that look like they might be addicted, people that have been abused in the past, right? All of these things are actually pretty simple to identify once you've kind of been trained. And a lot of these horrible people have kind of trained themselves on how to identify exactly that, right? And to recognize the vulnerabilities so that they can prey upon new victims. And then it's really important then to recognize that the populations that are most at risk for human trafficking are also those populations that are riding public transit, right? So we realize that they pretty much overlap. And again, I know you're not public transit, but I think that a lot of the common things that public transit have in common with CMV environments are the reason that we should be talking, right? So you are often working in remote areas, right? Oftentimes people find, let's say, bus shelters as a place of refuge, just like they might find a truck stop as a place of refuge, right? Bus operators might be looked at as someone to go to as an authority figure that might be able to help them get out of a situation, just as a truck driver or any over-the-road coach operator, right? And then I think it's really important that we recognize all of the phases of human trafficking, right? The recruitment stage. So this is some of the numbers from that same NOST survey. The tough thing about human trafficking is the information, right? We want to train about it. We want to tell everybody how important it is, but everybody says, so where's the numbers, the data that proves it? But nobody wants to admit that human trafficking is actually happening where they are, right? They all want to say it's a somewhere else problem. It's an international problem. It's oh yeah, I hear that happens in Miami, but never in my little town, right? Like, it's always, it's not in my system, not in my backyard, because then it's too personal. then I have to do something about it, right? So we all like to think that it's somewhere else, but really it's happening under every one of our noses. So I like to really emphasize a lot of these numbers, especially when I train, because 60% used a bus when they were being recruited, right? So these bus operators can recognize these victims long before they're ever even victims. I think another thing, after working with victims for so many years, is that they never feel seen. They feel like they're out and about in public and everyone turns the blind eye, right? You see someone maybe that looks disheveled, that looks uncomfortable, and what do? You don't look at them, right? You typically look away because it hurts. It hurts your insides, right? We're humans. We don't want to see someone else suffer. We don't want to recognize that we might actually be able to make a difference in that stranger's life that we're walking past, right? 75% of survivors reported that a bus was used during their exploitation. So buses are being used to exploit victims while they're being trafficked. So if we can train anyone to recognize what it looks like to be trafficked, right? What those red flags are that they should be recognizing, then we have to obviously give them something to do, right? So we went around and trained hundreds of transit operators and then realized that no one had a policy in place. So we're training them all to recognize it, and they're all recognizing it, and then they're saying, I recognized it, now what do I do? Who do I tell? They want to tell me, because I train them on what to recognize. Well, I can't do anything, right, if you're recognizing these things. So what we've realized is that a policy really is important. So we came up with, it's okay, we want to dance. We came up with this idea of some best practices, right, of what we can do to really help guide people along the way that want to help, that want to make a difference, right? So first, implement that training. So Kylla talked about all of those resources that are available out there, and they're all free. But I don't want to turn a blind eye to the fact that training takes time, right? And so we all have to invest in paying our employees to be in the training room. It takes time, it takes resources, right? So we have to then convince the powers that be that human trafficking is the topic that should be included in your refresher training every year, right? And if somebody's close to that topic, sure, it's easy to tie it. But if you don't know anybody that's been human trafficked, if you've never really heard a story and recognized a victim and it doesn't touch home to you, you're certainly not going to invest or think that it's worthwhile to invest all of your time into that topic, right? I think the easiest on this list is to display the awareness materials. So TAT provides them free of charge, and if you even want to, customize them to your own organizations, they'll help you with that as well. I think the third is probably the toughest, to connect to your local resources. So the way that I put it is, I'll ignore a phone call of somebody that I don't know pretty quickly, and I don't even really feel bad about it, right? But if my friend's calling me, I'm much more likely to pick up the phone. And so make friends with the people that you know you're going to need in the future, right? Call and build those relationships. Ask them ways that you can be helpful to them as well, because oftentimes you have some sort of mutually beneficial opportunity, right, to build these relationships. So talk to the people that are going to be able to connect you to resources and build those relationships so that when you do, right, when that day does come that you need to call and report something, they're going to answer the phone and actually help you. And then establish a reporting protocol. So I understand that this sounds probably the most daunting to most people, but I think, policy and protocol is sexy and exciting. And so, so what we did was we worked together to come up with this protocol, because really in order for any training to be effective, you have to know what to do once you recognize what you've been trained to recognize, right? And I'm not here to tell you exactly what you should be doing or what you should implement, but I'm here to help give you kind of like the skeleton or kind of the guidance, the outline of what you might want to use to develop your own policy if you don't already have one in place. So this is available on the TAT website. It's also available on the QR code. It's really a 5-page document, and it's a Word document, so it's easy to download, to make it adaptable to your own organization. It includes definitions, roles and responsibilities, and then some general resources. And then it has specific procedures for 3 different person types for this particular template. It's an employee reporting, and then we tell the employee to report it to dispatch. So we then have a protocol for dispatch to follow, and then dispatch is told to report it to their supervisor. So there's a protocol for the supervisor to follow. So this QR code is just repeated so that I could keep talking and you guys can find it. So we realized as we were developing the procedure that the appropriate response is going to vary depending on the type of scenario that you're recognizing, right? So you're obviously going to react a little bit differently if you see a victim that's alone and not necessarily asking for help as compared to when you see a potential trafficker with their trafficking victim, right? So we outlined kind of what should be done in each of those different procedures. And then this is just kind of a quick overview of what it looks like, right? So we talked to a lot of different transit agencies and they couldn't all agree on what should be and what shouldn't be included. So there's some optional text throughout, but really all of it's optional, right? And then again, sometimes in like parentheses, you'll see several different options, right? Dispatch, security, your immediate supervisor. So you're supposed to just pick whichever one's most appropriate, get rid of the rest. So the whole idea here that I wanted to highlight is when I do the training, most people say, okay, so what should I actually say? If I think somebody is definitely being trafficked, like, what do I say, right? That's really what it comes down to. They just want to know what to say. And oftentimes you hear, I don't want to say or report anything because if I'm wrong, I don't want somebody to get arrested because I said something. So I tell them, what you should say is, are you okay? Can I do anything to help? I mean, how difficult could that be, right? It doesn't take too much training to just ask if you can help. But then you have to be prepared if they say yes to actually provide them some help, right? And then I also say that if you call and you say, okay, I saw someone and I'm pretty sure that this is a human trafficking situation, unless you say they're human trafficking me, that phone call alone will not get anyone arrested. And I think emphasizing that point in itself, right, that your phone call alone is not going to be the reason that anyone gets arrested, that you will not be responsible for that person's arrest. It's their activities that they're doing will determine whether or not they get arrested once you make the call, right? I think then they're a little bit more receptive to actually reporting things. And then I think also it's important that we push that reporting up the chain sometimes, right? If the operator really is that uncomfortable, have the supervisor make the call, right? Just make sure that the call is made. So then, of course, we have to talk about some potential downfalls. So we saw a lot that the training was going through, and even some of the agencies that had developed this procedure, they didn't actually implement it into the training. So what they did was they spent a lot of money and time to develop a procedure that then sits on the shelf and collects dust and does nothing because they don't tell their employees that the procedure actually even exists, right? They're never actually trained on it. So it's really important to realize that this isn't accepted everywhere, right? Everyone's not going to be receptive to this topic. It's not something everyone wants to even think about is happening around them. And then that fear, uncertainty, and reluctance is going to push against some of your training and your protocol. So you're going to have to make sure that you continue that communication throughout. And then if you don't, again, put that policy into your training, it really won't matter. And the policy also includes reporting metrics, right? So every time you see something, you're told to report it, right? To ensure that it's marked, because if we don't measure things, then we certainly won't know that they're important, right? We measure what we want to manage. So with that, this is my QR code to my LinkedIn. If we haven't connected yet, I'm certainly welcome to connect. And if you have any questions, I know we have plenty of time for them.
Yes, and now it is Q&A. Surely someone has a question out there. Yes, ma'am.
The first lady, I'm not good with names, but she was talking about some of the federal and state civil statutes and laws where if they wanted to pursue a civil action against their trafficker. Reality to me would be how many really have the ability emotionally to actually do that.
It's still a pretty new, process. I know there was a substantial, settlement that just happened with some survivors with a hotel chain. I mean, it was significant. And I know that in a lot of labor trafficking cases, those seem to be the easiest to get the funding back because it's a legal job, you know, and so you can like count the hours that they worked. And so there's been a little bit more remedy on the labor trafficking side for some of those things, but on the sex trafficking side, there are law firms that are now starting to take on those cases. And so they're pretty substantial when they hit. I mean, we're talking like multi-million-dollar settlements, because if they can prove that hotel management knew and were complicit in their trafficking and never reported it and were sort of cozied up with the trafficker. I know that there's pending lawsuits with casinos in Vegas and other areas. I know that there are pending lawsuits against several other hotel chains, rental car chains, things of that nature. So it is sort of a new field, but yeah, I mean, I think the percentages are gonna be low on that for those reasons.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Yes.
Oh, are y'all seeing any headway being made with forced labor, like in our CMV world? If we see Amazon vans being transported to transit vans, more than likely that driver is being forced, you know, and you're well aware from being at CVSA. Are you seeing any headway or anything making any progress in?
Well, I think we're talking about the hotshot drivers, so there's a lot of hotshot drivers that are certainly not abiding by a lot of the regulations and the commercial vehicle regulations, and there has been some concern, quite a bit of concern, that these hotshot drivers are being trafficked and exploited by, you know, a central location, you know, these different businesses that are popping up and moving them. What I will say is no matter how you feel about it, the English language requirement now that has become law, that's gonna be at least a remedy tool in law enforcement's belt, because from what I was understanding from a lot of the hotshot drivers that were suspected trafficking victims, they did not speak English as their first language, and they were often having to call a third party to translate the conversations with law enforcement. It's gonna be at least a remedy that you can maybe separate them from their truck and get them into some type of services. So I am curious to see how that will play out once those two things collide.
Thank you for me.
Mm-hmm.